and we have enough to destroy ourselves to oblivion. The question again is, if really God is good and God has a good plan, how come we see a world filled with conflict? Conflicts are the evils of our world, and why there is so much conflict in the world. So it's a very important issue to address. What is evil? And many people have their own ideas, but principle has a very clear idea. Before we define goodness, let's look at the opposite. Goodness, it is the thoughts, words, and actions when it is done for the sake of others, even at the expense of the self. It is based on true love, supporting the purpose of creation. But this is the problem. Man is contradictory, even though he wants to be good. He wants to be good, but he is not always good. He avoids evil, but he could not say honestly, I have not done anything evil. This is the contradiction in man. And it is also written by Paul when he wrote to the Romans, when he said, what I do is not the good I want to do. No, the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. So there is an inner struggle in man. And that struggle is caused by the contradictory nature. What is the contradictory nature? A nature opposing goodness. So therefore, we can now say that there is a force opposing our goodness that came from God. According to the Quran, we have a double side also, or double. But it is possible thing which is good for you, which is very similar to what Paul said to the Romans. And that you love a thing is bad for you, but God knows and you do not. So we are in the middle. We want things that are bad, we don't want things that are good, according to the Quran. So now the contradiction can be defined as something opposite to that of good. If goodness is for the sake of others, then the contradiction of good would be replacing the position of two words. Instead of for the sake of others, it is for the sake of ourselves at the expense of others. This is the basis of false love, and it does not support but oppose the purpose of creation. This is why the first contradiction, the first conflict happened within us, within man. We have two desires according to introduction. The good and evil are fighting over us. But God is absolutely good. God created everything good. Evil did not exist from the beginning. Lucifer even was created as a good angel. He became an evil being later. So the principle rejects dualism. This is a belief in philosophy that good and evil actually started from the beginning. Good and evil always existed. Principle says no. Spiritual good, physical is evil? No. Augustine is actually a dualist. He's a Manichaean. That's one of the doctrines that was developed in the Catholic theology. But principle rejects that because God is absolutely good. Some people say you need evil to understand good. It's like knowing hot and cold. But you don't have to be robbed to know that. You don't have to be killed to know that murder is bad. A woman doesn't need to be raped to know that rape is bad. Absolutely good is absolute and could stand by itself. It does not need evil to identify itself. That's why when asked of the question, is it natural? The answer obviously is not. Because when we are created with two opposing nature, it would be two conflicting purposes resulting to no value. Just like the example of a leaking glass. What is the value of a beautiful, expensive leaking glass? No value. Because it has dual conflicting purposes. It is used to hold liquid, but at the same time, it is leaking it underneath. If man is meant to be good, he's supposed to be good to fulfill his value. But if man is meant to be good and evil at the same time, that creates the situation problem, the problem. So God would not create us with opposing purposes. We know that God gave us the original mind. The original mind is good. But what we don't know, and what we should know, if evil did not come from God, where did it come from? That's why principle said it is that first fundamental conflict within the individual that leads to the conflict that spread all over the world and throughout history. And therefore it goes without saying that in order to solve the conflicts of the world, where do we have to begin to start addressing it? In ourselves as an individual. Because that is where good and evil actually originates. That is why we need to understand the origin. We know God is the origin of goodness, but where did evil come from? Richard Heinberg, who studied many cultures, said, people in every age and culture have insisted that evil had a specific cause. It has an origin. That we become like this because it has been perpetrated from generation to generation, but nevertheless, it has the same cause. Now, let's look at different cultures. How do people view evil? One of the earliest civilization is the Greek civilization, and they have a mythology, and they call the Pandora's box the origin of evil. A woman, Pandora, is about to be married to a man who is half human, half God. She gave her a sealed box, and she should not have opened that. However, one time, the man left, leaving Pandora alone with the box, and her mind started to become curious. She wanted to know what's inside. Why is it not allowed to open that before marriage? When she did, finally, with the intention of only sealing it again, out came the contents of the box. And then that is why there was evil. According to the Greeks, this box contained evil. It could not be opened only after marriage. So in conclusion, the meaning is very similar to the fall of man. It is because of a woman who opened something before marriage. The box is like a symbol of her sexual organ. But in another culture, in the very far place of Africa, a man was called by God to bring this fruit back to him. But seeing how nice, smelling delightful, he tasted it and ate some more. By the time he brought it to God, it was already eaten, and so God was so upset. Why did you eat it first before you offer it to me? So as a result, he was punished by being placed in the hole in the ground where he would live his life. He became subterranean, or his life became substandard, not according to his original purpose. And so according to the African mythology, their conclusion is because of the man who could not control his desire and who put himself before God. But we're more familiar with this story. The story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is how Jewish, Christians, and Muslims believe how sin and evil came into the world. However, when we read the story, we talk about trees and snakes and apples and fruits. And so it does not have any bearance on our time. The Bible uses metaphors and symbols. All this Jesus said to the crowd in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. So therefore, there must be a story inside the story. If we read between the lines, there's much more to the story than Adam and Eve eating a forbidden fruit. So what really happened in the Garden of Eden? In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve was told, you will not die if you eat the fruit, after God told them that they should not eat. The serpent said to the woman, when you eat of this, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing what's good and evil. This was the temptation for Eve. At first, Eve refused to eat the fruit, but later on, she was convinced. And so, she disobeyed God and ate the forbidden fruit. God said, don't eat. Eve ate. It didn't stop there. The next thing we know, Eve was asking Adam to eat the fruit. At first, Adam also refused. He said, I'm not even supposed to touch that or look at that. But then, through the persuasion of Eve, Adam ate, and finally, he also ate the forbidden fruit. That was the fall of man. And that's why it's very simple. From now on, let's stop eating apples, or let's stop eating fruits. If we only read this literally. But according to Father's revelation, there's much more to this, because this will reveal to us the most important secret hidden in history. The secret of the original fall, or the original sin. It begins with understanding that the fruit is not an apple. Or it's not either a literal apple for that matter. Because first of all, God is a God of love. A parent does not put his children to that kind of test. And also, how come the punishment is so severe? If God cannot do that, if we cannot do that to our children, how come we think that perhaps God did that? And God is a perfect parent. Secondly, why did it affect future generation if it involves the mouth and the digestive system? One time, Jesus was criticized for eating something with his disciples. And he said something like this in Matthew 15:11. It is not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man. It is what comes out from the mouth. still Peter didn't get it. So he asked, what do you mean, Jesus? And so Jesus has to explain. When you eat, you chew, you swallow, you digest, and you throw it out after you digest. Nothing wrong with your spirit, nothing wrong with your body, or you don't commit sin. But what comes out from your mouth are words, and your words come from your mind and heart. That can make you commit sin. So therefore, this fruit is not literal. And the most compelling reason and argument is the third. Life is greater than any kind of fruit. Adam and Eve were aware about this fruit's risk. If you eat that, you will die. So a person who was given that warning is thinking to eat is to die, not to eat is to live. So it's a choice between life and death. And what was the choice? What was the decision of Adam and Eve? They would rather die because they ate the fruit. If you know something is deadly and you still eat it, it means you committed suicide already. But then we're talking about a fruit. Again, going back to the original idea of the fruit, the apple is sweet, it's tasty, it's delicious, but are you willing to exchange your life for an apple? Obviously, the answer is not. So why would Adam and Eve risk their life for an apple? Because it is not a literal apple. So therefore, it becomes very mysterious. What is this fruit that Adam and Eve consume? If the fruit is symbolic, eating the fruit cannot be literal. It is also symbolic. If the fruit is symbolic, the tree cannot be literal. The tree must also be symbolic. But before we try to speculate, let's look at one more being. A being that can talk, a snake that can talk. It knew God's commandment. If the commandment is given to man, how come this animal know that? Some people will say, no, this animal is just disguised. But if this is a disguised animal, then how come it was able to tempt man? How in the world can an animal tempt a human being of superior intelligence? Diba? You cannot be tempted by your dog. You cannot be tempted by your cat. But this one, in the story, God said don't eat. This serpent said eat. And who did they follow? The serpent. There's something wrong with the story if Adam and Eve believe the serpent. That's why we have to understand that this is not also a snake or a being disguised as a snake. And does the Bible tell who that is? The Bible revealed his identity. And that great dragon was thrown down. Sometimes this dragon is called the great serpent. That ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, and his angels were thrown down with him. When he was thrown down, he was thrown with his angels. He was a leader of many angels. And that is called an archangel. And so that is no other than the archangel Lucifer. But this is very medieval. This is not really the image of Satan or Lucifer, because he is a tempter, the deceiver, and therefore nobody can be deceived by a man who has horns and tail. Kaya hindi pwede. And so it was revealed in the book of Isaiah, his name Lucifer. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground. You lay the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God and will set my throne on high. Very proud, very haughty. I will make myself like the Most High. No? Our elder brother Hyung Jinin described this as his hubris, as why it happened. But angels are good beings as far as our history, our religion would tell us. But how come angels are involved in sin? But once upon a time, in very, very ancient time, there were angels who were punished. They were sent to hell, according to 2 Peter 2:4. And why they were punished? They sinned. What kind of sin would make God, after creating angels, would throw them to hell? Is it also written in the Bible? It is. In the book of Quran 7:11, and certainly we created you, Adam, then we fashioned you, then we said to the angels, prostrate to Adam, meaning bow to Adam. So they prostrate except one. Iblis is Lucifer in the Quran. He was not of those who prostrated. Iblis did not humble to Adam. He was proud. And the Bible talks about the sin in the book of Jude, and comparing the sin to the people who were punished in Sodom and Gomorrah. What were the people guilty of doing? Why God destroyed their cities with brimstone and sulfur? Sexual immorality and perversion. It mentioned the angels committed the same sin. So the Bible is clearly revealing this, that the sin of the angels were sins of sexual immorality and perversion, similar to Sodom and Gomorrah. So we're talking about the angel tempting Adam and Eve. So this is definitely a clue to understand what happened in the Garden of Eden. Going back to the story and reading between the lines, now we can begin to enlighten ourselves of what really happened. What really happened to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? Initially, they were naked, but they were not afraid, or they were not ashamed. But what made them feel ashamed is after they ate the fruit. If Adam and Eve ate the fruit, then they should have felt ashamed of their hands and mouths. And they should have covered their mouths or hidden their hands behind their back. But the actions of Adam and Eve after they ate the fruit, after they felt ashamed, it is a different part of their body that they cover. In a word, according to Job 31:33, I have concealed my sin as Adam did. So whatever Adam hid was the part that he was ashamed about. And whatever Adam felt ashamed about are the parts that committed sin. So ladies and gentlemen, that's why the problem of Adam and Eve is not the fruit, literal, using the hands or the mouth, but it is the parts that they cover, their sexual sin. This is the revelation of revelations. In the book of Quran, Satan tempted them, Adam and Eve, so that they might reveal to them their nakedness, which they had never seen before. Thus Satan did cunningly seduce them. The word seduce is used by Quran, which is actually more appropriate, more clearly leaning towards sexual. Let not Satan deceive you as he deceived your parents out of paradise. He stripped them of their garments to reveal to them their nakedness. The Bible and the Quran are the same book, are both inspired by the same God, written in a different way. In the result, they both ate of the tree, and so their nakedness appeared to them. They began to sew together for their covering leaves from the garden. Thus did Adam disobey his Lord and allow himself to be seduced. Perhaps you have not opened the Quran, but if you try to study the Quran, it is actually talking about the same. Talking about the fall of Adam and Eve. So what crime did Adam and Eve commit? It is the crime of sexual sin. Adam and Eve misused their sexual parts. Now we can understand the significance of the fruit. Trees reproduce by the fruits. People also have fruits. What is the fruit of man? The fruit of man is sexual. Trees reproduce by the seeds of the fruit. Through the sexual love, the seed is produced. A new generation of people are born. So in the Garden of Eden, it is not an apple, it is not any kind of fruit, it is the sexual love, particularly of Eve that committed sin. Again, we read from the Quran, behold, we said to the angels, bow down to Adam, and they all bowed down, except who? Iblis, Lucifer. He was one of the jinns. Jinns means evil spirit. And he broke the command of his Lord. Will ye then take him and his progeny? Progeny means seed. Now these are the different translators of the Quran. Pickthall call it seed instead of progeny. Shakir calls it offspring. The Quran talks about the lineage, the seed of Lucifer, actually talking about the lineage as protectors rather than me. So, will you then take him and his offspring or his children as protectors rather than me? This is from the book of Quran. So what really happened, and what really is the origin of human evil that started all the evils of the world, is the premature and the illicit sexual relationship of the first human ancestors. In the first chapter, we discussed the sacredness of the sexual organ, the most the sacred part of the human body, symbolizing God. If God is both masculine and feminine, I am masculine, women are feminine. Because of that, nothing so different between children when they're born except their sexual organ. So when they grow up, they become man and woman. And since God is one, the ideal of the sexual organ is also to become one. The coming together of the sexual organ or the sexual act is actually an idea that came from God. And it is a desire, and it is a fulfillment like no other in the world, in the human experience. But its first experience was destroyed because of Adam and Eve. That's why God is saying our first experience and our first taste of love should be with God. That's why there should be no fruit, eating of the fruit in the beginning. When God said don't eat, He also said be fruitful. Fruitful means maturity, perfection. Perfection has something to do with the fruit. That's why the meaning of self-control, self-dominion, self-discipline is to be able to control one's sexual desire. If one could not control his sexual desire, he cannot achieve his matured state of being. And then, even though we talk about the fall, is misuse of the sexual organs and the misuse of sexual love, it does not mean that sex is bad or sex is wrong. God created Adam's sexual organ precisely to fulfill that, and Eve as well. In fact, that is the consummation of conjugal love. Even Father went on to explain that in marriage, the owner of the sexual organ is the partner, not yourself. So Adam's sexual organ is Eve's, and Eve's sexual organ is Adam. And they can only use that with each other's permission. And then when these two come together, through those sexual organs, a miracle will happen. The spark of life will happen when the sperm meets the egg, producing a child. That's why God said, be fruitful and multiply. He did not say sex is evil and sex is bad. But He said we have to be pure before marriage. And then we can eat the fruit after, as much as we want, as often as we want, but not before. We can also see its importance when we look at the three highest values in life are all connected, related to sexuality. That's why in marriage, they want to live together for a long time. Also, there's no meaning to life if there's no love. And when you combine love and life, you produce the lineage. And where do lineage come from? They don't come out from the ears or the mouth. They come from the sexual organs. So, it is only the principle who explains that the lineage is actually, sexuality is holy and sacred. Father always talks about that. So this is what happened. The first act of the fall is between Lucifer and Eve. When Lucifer tempted Eve to eat the fruit and Eve ate the fruit, it means accepted the temptation. And action created the condition for their sexual relationship. This is called the spiritual fall. Eve received from Lucifer the feeling of dread from guilty conscience, Lucifer's wisdom, and Adam as the intended spouse. But it did not end there. Eve gave the same fruit, creating the condition not only for the spirit to fall, but also from the point of view of their lineage. The physical body also was fallen. So this is what produced the lineage. Adam and Eve produced children according to the principle, but basically it is produced not of God's motivation, not of God's love. And once children are born, they can no longer change the way they were born. They cannot refuse their parents. Once you're born, you're born. So whether we like it or not, we're descendants of Adam and Eve. And because we're descendants of Adam and Eve, we inherited something from Adam and Eve. We call that original sin. So when we were born, we're ignorant, we're innocent, our eyes were closed, but we're already guilty of one sin. What sin? Original sin. If Adam and Eve did not break the condition of keeping purity before marriage, then they would have been blessed and they would be free to eat. They would be free to eat as much, to eat as often. And Adam and Eve would become the perfect man and woman, producing good children, and that would become the condition of establishing the ideal family, society, nation, and world. And history would have been rewritten in a different way. But it didn't happen like that. Before Adam and Eve can reach their maturity, they fell. How did they fall? By becoming husband and wife. The problem was Adam and Eve married each other without God's blessing, without God's permission. And so that created a very similar structure, but very different content in as far as what God wants. And this can be far-fetched as far as the story of Adam and Eve is concerned. But when we look at our world, we can see that it's all over our world. The problem with our world is not about trees and snakes and fruits and apples, but the problem of our world is love. All religion talks about love to be supposed to be pure and chaste and holy. The punishment, or the worst punishment, is given to those who violate the law of love. Even some religious people, they would rather keep themselves single all their lives because they want to be pure for God. Not only among the Catholic priests and nuns. Also, the effects was passed on through generations and lineages. The Bible speaks that even though we are created by God, but we are fathered by Satan. This is a contradiction. God created man, but all men are fathered by Satan. And Jesus said that to the very people who are proud of their lineage, the Jews. The Jews are proud that they are children of Abraham, and therefore they're chosen. When they're proud of that, Jesus said to them, God can make descendants of Abraham from the stones. And then he said, you belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desire. Very, very hurting. If you're a Jew and then somebody tells you, you're not son of Abraham, you're a son of the devil. No? But it's Jesus who said that. He even said, you are sons of vipers and broods of vipers. Why would Jesus use snakes as model? Filipino used the word tupa. Mga anak kayo ng tupa. But Jesus said, anak kayo ng ahas. Anyway, you must be born again. Also, when Nicodemus, one of the most educated men in Israel, he asked Jesus, how can I enter the kingdom of heaven? Jesus' answer was a big shock for him because Jesus said, you need to be born again. Why do you have to be born again? Because you were born of the lineage of Adam and Eve. And because Jesus is limited, he could not explain the fall of man. He can only explain a clue that the way to enter heaven, you have to come out of that lineage and be born into a new lineage. That is the mission of the Messiah, to change our blood lineage. Also, the third is degradation of sexual love. As we have explained, the significance, the value, the purity, and the godliness of sexual love. But we see a different kind of practice when we look at the world and its practice of sexual love. Now love is being sold like a commodity. No? I thought when I was young that it's because of poverty, but we see prostitution also in very rich countries. Even among the upper bracket income families, we can see people practicing the same prostitution. So is there really a price for love? Mother said, if you are loving your spouse and somebody wants to borrow your spouse for a certain amount, there's no amount that you would agree to let your spouse be used by somebody. It is so exclusive. But people sell their love for 1,000 pesos perhaps, or 2,000 pesos. Anyway, it's like a commodity. It should not be like that. So all of this only indicate that our problem is love, non-principled love. It's very powerful. Family breakdown. People marry but they separate. The average duration of an American marriage who divorces is 7.5 years only. And if you marry again after you divorce, the American marriage, the divorce rate rises to 80% according to studies. If it's a third marriage, it's 85%. There are more divorces in multiple marriages. Hindi yung sabay-sabay, pero yung nag-divorce at nag-asawa ulit. And always, when there is divorce, yung mga bata ang pinakakawawa. It's the children who suffers the most. According to a study now, 25% of all children born in America are born of unmarried mothers. It does not mean they don't have fathers, but the fathers don't want to take responsibility or the mothers refuse to have a husband. That's why they just raise up their children by themselves. And according to, again, many studies, this is the origin of many problems among young people in their development. No? That's the origin of many problems like homosexuality, juvenile delinquency, etc. Even school violence and early pregnancies. Much of this happens among children born of unmarried mothers. Not all, of course, but the greater percentage as compared to children born of two parents. So, the false love is the leading breakdown, is the leading cause of family breakdown. It's like a web that traps us and destroys us. So that's really a very clear proof that the problem is related. The problem of Adam and Eve is related to our modern age. The problem of love. It is not a problem of eating or just disobedience. It's not a problem of fruit or snake. It's the problem of love. We don't know how to love, or we only practice false love. This is the problem. Even the cause of crimes, it is said that all criminals develop a certain kind of psychological or social conflict, because there's no criminal act without a criminal mind. Criminal mind starts with social and psychological conflicts that originates in the problems in the family. When families break down, that's the time that they encounter all of these conflicts in their life. That's why every single problem in our society, we can say, stems from the problem in the family. Where did juvenile come from? Good family or dysfunctional family? It's very clear. Where do criminals come from? Where do prostitutes come from? Where do drug addicts come from? Did they come from good family or dysfunctional family? The society is a reflection of our family. That's why if we only have good families, we will have no problems also in society. That's very, very important. Even in the study of history, many historians were able to understand this, although they don't know the root, that the problem of many civilizations' decline is not only the weaknesses of their economy or military or administration, but because of their family and morality decline. Behind great men are great women, behind great women are great men, but also behind their fall is the opposite sex, committed sin with them. So when the family and the morality is strong, the nations prosper. But even if it is strong already, if it becomes weak, or if the morality becomes low and the family is broken, then that nation, despite its powers and energies and military might, it will also decline. And again, this is a very important understanding and conclusion to understand. This is the world scripture. This is a book that is compiling all the great teachings of the world. And you can see how all religions have actually taught against misusing of love. Meaning that this direction is not just for one faith or one tradition. It is taught by all religions of the world. In the Old Testament, before Jesus came, in the book of Exodus, it says, do not commit adultery. Do not covet thy neighbor's wife. Right? This is part of the 10. And then in the New Testament, we can see this again as taught by Jesus. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a man commits are outside of his body. But he who sins sexually sins against his own body. He violates his own body, the temple of God. You have heard that it said, according to Matthew, you shall not, but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Jesus is saying that we don't have to commit the act in the body, but if we have that lustful thoughts and thinking, we have made that sin already in our hearts. And then also he said, if your eyes make you commit sin, pluck it out. It's better for you to enter the kingdom of heaven rather than to have both eyes fine but burn in hell. The same thing with the hands. It's better. That is how serious the Bible talks about keeping purity. You would rather be blind and without hands or foot rather than to enter the spiritual world with them. That's why this is a very serious. In the book of Quran, it says, do not come near adultery. It is a deed, a shameful deed, and an evil, opening the road to other evils. It means that Quran also says that this is like an origin, a beginning point of all sins. It opens you to other kinds of evil, other forms of evil. It begins with sexual sin, adultery. Also in the Quran, do not commit fornication. The penalty on the day of judgment will be doubled. It is the only sin to receive double punishment. This is how Muslims also consider this as a very serious violation. It is not as an exclusive teaching of Christianity or Judaism or Islam. O Adam, again Quran, dwell you and your wife in the garden, enjoy its good things as you wish, but approach not this tree or you will run into harm and unrighteousness. God gave them a warning. Now this is from Buddha teaching. The man who goes to the wife of another digs up the very roots of life. Roots, it means if you kill the root, everything is dead. So a man who goes after the wife of another, adulterous relationship, digs not only some part but the very root of life. Everything of life will be destroyed. 4 things happen to the thoughtless man who takes another man's wife, meaning committing the sexual sin. The degradation of the soul, that's one. A frightened pleasure but nevertheless frightened. The danger of the law, you endanger yourself with the law, and the path of hell. This is how Buddhism considers purity as a very serious matter. That any form of sexual sin is met with a very severe punishment. From the Hindu tradition, when unrighteous disorder prevails, the women sin and are impure, this disorder carries down to hell the family. It affects not only the person who committed sin, but the whole family, destroys the righteousness of birth. The lineage is destroyed. This is from Jainism, also coming from India. It is better to die than to indulge in partaking of forbidden, lustful pleasures. It is better to die, no, kaysa sa committing that kind of sin. From Zoroastrianism, adultery is the worst deed that man and tyrants commit. It is not just a bad sin, it is the worst sin that men and tyrants commit. What kind of sin? Sexual sin, misusing of love. In the Baha'i faith condemns the illegitimate and improper expressions such as free love, all of which it considers positively harmful to man and to the society. Condemns the illegitimate and improper expressions of the sex impulses such as free love. This is some point, or this is one area where all religion can come together to fight and to promote purity. Famous Chinese proverbs, I don't know how it reads, but it means prostitution is the head of evil. Not the body, not the tail, it is the head of evil. And what is that? It is the misusing of love. So all religion speaks the same. So conclusion, as according to the divine principle, the cause of human conflict and the root cause of all evils is the non-principled or false love. The story of Adam and Eve, talking about fruits and snakes and trees, are just a metaphor explaining what really happened. The selfishness or the self-centeredness. And that's why if we really want to make a good change in our world, it should begin from there. We should transform our evil to goodness by changing our false love to true love. The result of the fall, we lost the position of our first human ancestors, Adam and Eve, our original parents. We lost our original lineage of goodness. We lost our original connection to God. Our original connection. That's why Adam and Eve is important. It's very important in as far as the idea of creation is concerned. They're not ordinary beings, but they are the first son and the first daughter of God. The spirit of disobedience and rebellion was imprinted into the human character and passed on to the descendants by the continued misuse of love. A world of conflict and suffering emerged, which is not part of God's idea. This is the origin. So what is the result of the fall? Conflict and misery. First, there was this illicit love between the first human ancestors, Adam and Eve. And then it developed into what? It developed into violence when Cain, the elder brother, murdered Abel. So that's why when you look at all the history, the greatest sin and the worst sin of man is either illicit love and violence against each other. This is the tradition of the first family. Definitely not a true family, but a false family. That's why the Messiah has to save mankind by establishing the tradition of the true family. But with all of this understanding, Father said the most deep reflection that we should have is to have an understanding of the suffering heart of God. God's heart was deeply broken. If we understand this, Father said, we can change ourselves and we can change our direction from then on. However, even if we understood the fall, but we don't have any feeling of the brokenheartedness of God, then we still do not understand the fall. So the real story of the fall is how much God had suffered and how much it caused pain to his heart and how much he has broken. Have you ever felt heartbroken? If you have not feel, then perhaps you don't still understand the meaning of being heartbroken. God has invested, given everything, only to be taken away from him what he has taken. This is fat words describing God. God is like a father who worked and sweated his entire life to accumulate assets for his children, only to have a thief steal everything in one night. That is Satan. Who can comprehend the sorrowful, painful heart of God? God lost his lineage, God lost his children, and God was forced to hand over the ownership of the nations and the world to Satan. God is the owner, God is the creator, God is supposed to be the one who would take ownership, but he lost all that. And he lost that because of that event, the fall of man. So that is the first.